And once again, just want to welcome everyone for those that just joined. This is Efficiency Canada's weekly discovery session, which we've been doing pretty much consistently since March, as soon as we entered lockdown. For those that are just joining us for the first time, this discovery session was something that Efficiency Canada used to do on our own as our staff every Friday. And we decided, given that everybody was, in their homes and maybe looking for a bit of something to learn or a bit of a release on Fridays, that we'd open it up to the community. We had no idea if people would be interested, but 5 months later, we are still doing it and still getting between 50 and 100 people every week, and so it clearly has some value to the community, and we're very excited that we can continue to provide this because we're tapping into the brain trust of all of you and sharing the knowledge within the sector. So welcome today on Friday. So as per usual, what we do with this session is we have our presenter do about 20 minutes and then 20 minutes of Q&A. We only have one rule on this entire session, and that is no sales pitches. So that goes for Andrew, and it also goes for each of you. So I guess Andrew's just finding that out today. And that goes for each of you as well. So with your questions and your chats and things like that, just try and keep it to the content. So without further ado, I want to introduce Andrew Pride, who is, one of a leading and one of a handful of experts in the country on building codes, advanced energy building codes. Andrew's got a long history in the sector. He's been doing this for over 30 years. Many of you probably have run into him at one point or another. He's currently the chair of the Standing Committee on Energy Efficiency. The National Research Council of Canada has been doing that for a couple of years. And he's also had stints at the Ontario Power Authority and before that in the private sector with Minto. But really, Andrew is a facilitator. He's a strategic advisor. He's an energy efficiency expert. He's a funny guy too. So, hopefully he can bring in some of that humor. But we were really thrilled at Efficiency Canada to work with Andrew on this project because we feel that advancing, net zero energy ready building codes is an often neglected area of this space. And as I said earlier, there's not many people who spend their days, thinking, working and advancing and advocating for this. But we think it's a really important thing to do. And certainly there's been a bigger push lately, specifically from the federal government on this. And we hope that that translates into provincial work very soon, because the time is now to advance this. And if any of you saw the throne speech this week, you noticed how important and prominent energy efficiency is and will be in this country's climate plan, and building codes are absolutely central to that. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to Andrew, who's going to give us our presentation. There are two ways for you to chat and provide questions, and I'll be monitoring that at the end. There's a chat button at the bottom, and there's also a Q&A question button there as well. So take it away, Andrew.
Thanks, Corey, and thanks to Efficiency Canada for allowing me the opportunity to present and to prepare the discussion paper. As we know, this is an important topic. The best way to achieve energy efficiency is to build it in up front. This is why codes are so important, energy codes are so important, and even more important is ensuring compliance with those codes. Nice to have the policy, but we want to make sure we pull through with buildings that are actually built to higher performing standards and meet the energy codes that are in place. There's a lot of change coming up. We're going to see tiered energy codes rolling across the country over the next few years. This is going to put additional strain on authorities having jurisdictions and other folks. And we want to make sure that we act now on ensuring that code compliance is something that is natural and easy to do, as opposed to perhaps the burden that it may be in some jurisdictions today. I just want to clarify one thing in Corey's pleasant address of who I am. I'll try to do humor, but we'll see how that goes. But what's one important thing is I don't represent the National Research Council or Codes Canada on this project. These are my opinions as an independent contractor. So please don't assume that this reflects anything that Codes Canada does. Okay, enough of the legal disclaimer. Today's topics, we're going to talk about a little bit about energy code background, some of the barriers that I uncovered while talking to folks across the country, and best practices that are out there, and then a few high-level recommendations that we can go through. And I would enjoy the conversation afterwards about where do those recommendations fit in, how do we drive the next steps, because we got to take action today and make sure that things are happening. Good news is there is a lot of best practice out there. There's a lot of stuff going on in this country in various jurisdictions. It's just not going across the country. So let me tell you a little bit about how codes are made and how the energy code is done. And first and foremost, energy codes under the Constitution and building codes are the purview of the provinces and territories. They are not something that can be federally legislated. So this is something that provinces and territories have to adopt. We, as the code committee on the Standing Committee on Energy Efficiency, we create a national model energy code, which provinces can choose to fully adopt. They can choose to put annexes to it or amendments to it. They can rewrite it if they want to rewrite it, or they can reference something else. They don't even have to do energy codes if they don't want to. But a lot of municipalities, or sorry, a lot of jurisdictions actually have good energy codes in place today. They take those energy codes and they hand them down to the municipalities and to the building officials and say, okay, enforce these things. So it's up to the municipalities and their building officials and building departments to actually ensure that buildings are being built to the building code as well as to the energy codes. So that's kind of how the dynamic works. Figure it out, put together an energy code, and make it happen through the municipalities. Currently, we're seeing fairly decent adoption across the country with regard to the national codes. The charts provided by Efficiency Canada that you'll see on the left of your screen represent the current standing of the housing code. So that's part 936 of the National Building Code, and the bottom one is the NECB, so for larger buildings. The darker colors represent those that are taking a more stringent energy code, and the lighter colors are those that maybe don't have a code, an energy code, or have lower standards. And the cool one on the left with the stripes represents BC, who have adopted a voluntary energy step code, which has multiple tiers of energy performance. So they're really certainly leading the charge, and thanks a lot to the folks from the BC Energy Step Code for helping inform a lot of this discussion paper. But a lot of stuff is going on. Now, the really interesting part is a few years ago, federally, there was a regulatory reconciliation and cooperation table, big mouthful. But basically, these guys these folks are put together to cut out red tape. And one area they saw of red tape interjurisdictionally was that of building codes. So one of their recommendations is that we harmonize building codes. I'm happy to report that all the provinces and territories have agreed to sign up to a harmonized energy code across the country. That doesn't mean that every province is going to have exactly the same code, but they're all going to be based on the model national energy codes, and there will be schedules to put pluses or minuses based on things that they want to change within the code, but the baseline will be the same. So that's coming over the next few years, which certainly will make for a big change across this country, and it'll certainly add an extra layer of work for building officials in those jurisdictions that don't currently have energy codes or don't really emphasize energy codes. The national energy codes in December of 2021 will be published. These energy codes will have tiers. If all things go as planned, you'll see 5 tiers on the housing code. You'll see 4 tiers on the larger buildings. The housing codes are really geared towards the current voluntary programs, Energy Star, R2000, Net Zero Energy Ready. Those are tiers 3, 4, and 5 performance levels. And the NECB is a simple 25% reduction for each tier until you get to Net Zero Energy Ready, which we believe is about 25% of currently built buildings today, the energy performance level. One differentiator, or 2 differentiators that you'll see from the national energy codes to the good things that we're seeing in the BC Step Code and the Toronto Green Standards is we won't be using energy use intensities at this point in time. So it's really going to be a reference building and a proposed building, compare the 2 models, see what kind of performance level you have. And the second thing is we won't have GHG targets. And I know we'd like to see GHG targets. It'd be fun, exciting, and awesome to have GHG targets. But to do that provincially is very difficult, or sorry, across all provinces is very difficult. I mean, think about it. Do you want to reward a building in Quebec and let them use as much energy as they want because they have renewable grid, and you won't allow that type of building in Saskatchewan? Probably not. You want to bring down all energy use in all provinces and territories, in all buildings, as much as you can. So our focus is energy. not on GHGs. Again, provinces can choose to actually add on a GHG intensity target if they so choose when they adopt their national energy codes. So there's a lot of barriers. Clearly, there's a lot of things that are coming up that are going to make code compliance very difficult. And the good news is there's a lot of really, really interesting things happening in various jurisdictions across the country to help make those barriers go away. Now, imagine if we could take all those barriers and good work that's been done to address barriers right across the country, it'll be fantastic. So I'll give you a rundown on a few of them. There's more in the discussion paper and more discussion in there about some of these barriers and some of the solutions. I'll give you a rundown a bit in our time frame today. Big aspect of the whole idea of code compliance is, where is the priority? Is it important to various jurisdictions, various individuals? These are big questions to ask. And when I talked around to people anecdotally, I found that federally and provincially, energy codes and energy compliance is super high priority. There's the Pan-Canadian framework on clean growth and climate change that say 2030, we're going to have net zero energy ready codes in place. So it's really important to those folks. Municipalities, most of them have declared climate emergencies. Is the energy code the number one priority that they have, or is flood mitigation their number one priority? I mean, they're all priorities, but which one's higher than the other? It's probably energy codes are pretty important. And then you get down to the building officials and the local municipal enforcement agencies. Now these folks, they got to look at all building code objectives. There's 5 building code objectives. There are 17 sub-objectives. There's, on the high level, there's safety, there's fire, there's health, there's environmental considerations, and then there's accessibility. If you had to make a mistake somewhere, where are you going to make a mistake? Probably on the energy side more so than on compromising safety. Now, if you talk to a building official today, they're going to say they're all important, and they're going to make sure all of them comply. But the reality is, if something's going to slip, it's probably energy. So we need to do something now to make it easy to understand if a building complies or doesn't comply. And I think that's the basis of this whole paper is, how do we start that discussion today so that in 2021, 2022, and 2023, when we have tiered energy codes right across the country, that it's easy for a building official to go ahead and say, yes, this building complies, or no, that building doesn't comply. So a couple interesting things that have happened that are happening today. One of them is this phenomenal market transformation program happening in Toronto called the Toronto Green Standard. Now, Toronto can't put their own building codes in place. There are very select cities in the country that are called charter cities that are allowed to write their own energy codes, their own building codes. Vancouver's one of those. They started with the Energy Step Code, which BC eventually adopted. But Toronto isn't a charter city, so they can't do that. So instead, they chose to do this market transformation tool, which is to ask developers right at the early stages of planning and zoning, what level of performance are they going to achieve? And if they achieve tiers 2, 3, 4, or higher, they can get an incentive from the city for developing their land and their buildings on that land to those higher standards. It's a really interesting tool, and it allowed them to build capacity to review energy efficiency submissions and models. So they've got a team of people that are looking at energy models for the last decade that understand how they work. So it's a really good and interesting way to see how that market transformation can happen from a really, really early stage that maybe didn't need to have the energy code, but I'm sure they would love to see an energy code in place that was tiered, that matched what they were doing on the development and zoning side. The other good thing is there's a lot of training in BC with the Energy Step Code in place, a lot of stakeholder training. BC Hydro has been doing a lot of training. And in BC, they require their building officials to pass an exam. Toronto has the same thing. They have some credentialing requirements or some provisions and requirements in Ontario for professionals that are plan examiners and building officials. I think that training needs to roll out right across the country, and that type of examination and credentialing is going to be very important. And another interesting observation from folks was that mandatory energy disclosure and reporting may actually help with compliance. And that if you report on how much energy your building is using, it will certainly show whether the building was performing well or not performing well. It's a lagging tool, but it's a really important tool to show how well a building is performing. Talk to any builder out there. the developer out there, they're going to tell you, I know certainly from my Minto days, I can remember the dialogue, which was every province is different than the other provinces. What are the codes? What are the energy codes? Each jurisdiction is different. And frankly, you could go across the street and go into a new jurisdiction, and the interpretation from that building official may be different than the one that's in another area just south of a street. So that's got to go away. Builders would love to see that get better. So I think we need to get rid of the jurisdictional inconsistencies. The tiered energy codes are going to do a lot towards creating that level of consistency and predictability. In BC, the BC Hydro folks worked with the Building Official Association to write a checklist and say, how does this work and what do we have to look for, and make it consistent across their jurisdictions. NRCan took that, made it a nationally available document in both official languages. So those types of tools, awesome. They're going to help make things a lot easier for builders and for the building officials. My favorite is definitions and terminology. Holy smokes, we have tons of terminology and jargon out there, MUIs, TEDIs, GHGIs. Oh my goodness, the acronyms are wild. TLAs, three-letter acronyms, they're big out there. We need a definition library that just tells us exactly what we're talking about so that we're not confused. I've seen multiple definitions of TEDIs. I know as a code committee, when we heard that we're going to do net zero energy ready codes by 2030, we said, what does that even mean? We had 8 different definitions for net zero energy ready. For us, it was just like, hey, let's just minimize energy use and let's get it down to a level. But eventually when code comes into place, we can't just go, it should be this. We need something that's categorical and defined. So we need a lot of work. BC's again, I'm going to talk about BC a lot because they've done a lot of work in this. BC Housing put together a lot of guidelines with BC Hydro and the Energy Step Code Council. Really good stuff. Let's see if we can't expand that across the country. I can't talk about barriers if I don't talk about financial barriers. Frankly, this is in my eyes, this is a perception more than a reality. Folks are complaining that, okay, the energy modeler is going to cost me too much money. Frankly, if you talk to energy modelers, they save so much money if they're brought in early by giving better tools and better information to building owners to be able to reduce their costs, more than pay for what the energy modeler is going to cost you on a single family home. It's going to cost you less if you get them involved earlier. So it's a really good way to try and mitigate costs and have a better performing building. What was interesting to me as I started talking to stakeholders across the country was the fact that there's a huge amount of stakeholder mistrust. There's a lot of folks that don't trust building officials. There's a lot of folks that don't trust the energy modeling industry. I heard from some building official folks that said they got energy models in from a developer who had 3 different buildings and the energy model was exactly the same. How did that happen? So we need to build up a credibility situation where everyone can trust each other. In BC, again, they did a lot of training and a lot of guidance to try and make sure that everyone understood what they were talking about and where they were going. It would be interesting to see energy modelers with a certification process and a credentialing process that made them accountable for the energy models they put in. All sorts of good things that can happen by building that trust between those stakeholders. I think the other way is to give good resources to the building official departments or to the cities and municipalities. Take the City of Toronto, their Energy and Environment Division. They review all of their energy submissions for tier 2, 3, and 4 projects, and they go back into the building afterwards and confirm that the building was actually built the way they said they were supposed to be built. And these are mechanical engineers that understand building systems, really good folks that can actually make sure things work. So that's one way to help build trust, is to have folks that understand what's going on and make sure that they can catch these things before they get built and after they get built to make sure they're corrected. And the last barrier that I'll talk about is the lack of compliance reporting. It's not required for any municipality to say, yeah, this building complied or didn't. If the building was built, you assume it complied, but there's no reporting back to say what performance level, what tier. Even in BC, they don't have a report that comes back to say, this is the performance level that was actually achieved in each of the buildings. So I think this is a barrier that we see out there. The Efficiency Canada scorecard, this is the 2019 one. You see 2020, I'm sure will come out soon. I'm sure you'll see a little bit of improvement, but there's a lot of work that needs to come out when it comes to reporting compliance with various tiers and reporting compliance with the energy codes that are in place today. So lots of work needs to be done in that side on reporting. And I'll spend a few minutes now just talking about some of the high-level recommendations that I came up with for this. Fundamentally, we need to start to have discussions amongst stakeholders to create solid action plans so that when tiered energy codes are in place, it's fairly straightforward to ensure that they comply and that they're meeting a certain level of compliance. And here are 5 recommendations that the report outlines. One is to create national energy compliance guidelines. We can build on the stuff that's in BC, we can create them from new, but having guidelines that make it easy to understand in plain English to say, here's how a building tier 2 works and tier 3 and tier 4 works. This is what net zero energy ready means. These are what definitions are all about. What do these acronyms mean? All of that can be defined within these national energy compliance guidelines. The second thing, which is near to my heart, I've been a big fan of energy managers and embedded energy managers. I promoted that when I was at the Ontario Power Authority. And I think the IESO is continuing to do so. And certainly nationally, there's some energy managers. But imagine if we had subject matter experts that were resources available right across each province. And they could talk from province to territory to make sure things worked. Imagine having those resources that could understand energy models, could understand how interpretation works, and could help out jurisdictions so they don't have to have their own in-house expert in every municipality, in every aspect, every portion of the country. I think this is a huge item that could be done fairly straightforwardly, and it could really rapidly improve the amount of buy-in to tiered energy codes. Number 3, stakeholder training. Again, this is probably phased. Like, you probably don't need to get homeowners involved today on what a tiered energy code is, but you do need to get planners involved, builders involved, building officials involved, and start that discussion at that level. So there's going to be probably a phased approach to stakeholder training. Huge, key, important. I think in BC, the Energy Step Code is so much better because they engage stakeholders early. They listened to their feedback, they changed and adapted their code and made it work better. The 4th item was another big item, favorite of mine, is to create a national compliance database. Imagine every building that's being built being input into a database so that you could find out if we were building a 10-story MERB with 80 units in it, how did they comply? Did they comply? What tier level did they achieve? How did they achieve it? And if you even go further than that and say, now imagine that actually has interpretations in it. So a fellow that's in Red Deer can look at their building and say, I wonder how they interpreted this particular clause. And they could find out that someone else in Sackville in Nova Scotia interpreted something one way. They could see it in this database. Oh, that's how they interpret it. No, they were wrong. Let me tell them why it's wrong. Or, yeah, it makes sense, and interpret it that way. So this type of fluid communications through a database, huge. And then lastly, I'm gonna say that developing compliance funding models will be good. I started to work on a new 3 R's, Corey: raise, reward, and require. Raise funding to help people understand how to comply and pay for their energy efficiency. Reward them with paying them the funding that's in there, and then put a hook in the funding to require them to report out their energy performance levels. Raise, reward, require. So we see it in the States. The ARRA had some tie-ins. If you got funding from the federal government there for an energy project, guess what? You had to mandatorily disclose your energy use and how well you performed. Imagine if our funding mechanisms work the same way, that we required that reporting. It's not a big deal. Report what you have. Tie that into the energy database. They all kind of tie in all together. It's really exciting, and it really, I think, these 5 recommendations can start really interesting dialogues across the country on adopting and adapting to the new tiered energy codes that will be rolling out in the next few years. And speaking of discussion, Corey, let's move to that phase of this conversation, which is, let's get some discussion going and let's get some actions created.
Yes, let's do that, because that is the whole point of all this work. We don't like creating reports that sit on shelves. We like creating reports to take action. So why don't we jump right in? If you have a question that you want to ask Andrew based on what you heard, please put it into the Q&A button, which is at the bottom, sort of almost rightish part of your menu bar. Some people are putting it in the chat, so I'll just monitor both. First question is from Susan. So she asked, what are the applications that energy modelers use right now, homes and buildings, residential, commercial, and are there any certifications that the energy modelers must have in order to offer that kind of modeling service?
Yeah, there's homes have the one that's used the most is the EnerGuide rating system. So Hot 2000 is a super popular model that almost all energy assessors use when they look at homes, even new homes and existing homes. There is an association that is working through. I know Mark Rosen has been working with the Energy Evaluator Association to try and create some credentialing. But fundamentally, on larger buildings, there's a number of tools. There's eQuest, CanQuest, there's the IES tool, there's all sorts of tools. They all fundamentally perform the same way. There's little tweaks and balances between each of them. They're usually run by professional engineers, so we don't see a lot of certification in there. It would be a good idea if we started to see a bit more credentialing on the energy modeling industry. There's some folks out there that are amazing at doing it, and it'd be great to see that type of consistency across the board.
Great. Yeah, good point. Thank you. And our old pal James Glaive, who's also instrumental in this type of work out west, he asks, one of the recommendations we offer is around an SME, a subject matter expert in each province that everybody can tap into. He just asks kind of what entity or body or institution could host one of these experts, and is it kind of a neutral third party or is it within government?
Yeah, thanks, James. And great work with the Energy Step Council in BC. I think you guys have been doing an amazing job out there. I think it depends on the jurisdiction. You know, I think AHJs themselves, the building official departments, could have them. I know BC, out in your side of the world, James, they're funding building energy managers, which are going into the municipality to help bridge the gap between the builders and the building officials. It's really good. I could see this fitting in a provincial body like the IESO could house these individuals, the distribution companies, the gas companies. It could be anywhere. The idea, though, is that it's a shared resource for all municipalities within a province, and that there's a network of them that talk together so that they can share experiences and ideas. Where they're physically located, maybe Efficiency Canada will have a secretariat that has all of these loaded. What do you think, Corey? Maybe that's an idea.
Sure, why not? We like saying yes. Okay, so a couple questions related to the best practices portion of your presentation. So certainly we've used BC as kind of that model, and for the folks from BC Hydro and other folks on the Energy Step Code Council are listening in, you know, certainly those have been considered best practices. Are there other examples of best practice building codes, maybe internationally, that you could share beyond some of the examples you gave in the presentation?
Yeah, I restricted my search to Canada. There are some internationals. I know the IC's worked on it, or the IEA's worked on a bunch of things as far as guidelines. I think we like to look at, you know, Canada-made products and where are we going Canada-wide. I often find myself that when we compare ourselves to Europe and other jurisdictions, we don't really reflect the same way. So I kept the focus fundamentally to the North American jurisdiction. Certainly for what we see here in Canada, we've got a lot of really good examples. Why not build on stuff that we've done here in Canada already? Is my 2 cents worth on that side. But we could certainly, one of my suggestions in the report is that we expand the search out internationally to see if there are some models out there that could work. And certainly, if people want to put in some suggestions through the Q&A, we can certainly take a look at those and see where they may apply to the Canadian jurisdictions.
So on that point, Nick Schroeder asked, so on the subject matter experts, is that something that other territories or international experience have done, or is that something unique to Canada, just given kind of where we are?
I think it's relatively unique to Canada. I think the Canadian utilities have done a really good job with incenting strategic energy managers, embedded energy managers, building energy managers. There's various names for them, roving energy managers. We got a wealth of knowledge and insight. In fact, I think most of my American counterparts call me up to say, how'd you do that strategic energy manager program? How do you do the energy efficiency? So we're the experts in this. So we should be able to build on it from our own resources and our own knowledge of how embedded energy managers work. It's a phenomenal way to move the bar forward is by getting resources that are dedicated. City of Toronto, again, their energy and environment division, excuse me, has been phenomenal. They've got a team of experts that understand energy models, and they would be an example of a really good resource that other jurisdictions in Ontario should tap into to say, how did this work? What did people do? So we got a lot of experience here. I wouldn't actually look too far across the board, across the border to find out where things are, because I think we got this one nailed.
It's such an alternative approach because the Canadian way is to first look elsewhere when you realize maybe we've got it figured out here. Maybe we just need to organize it better and have a bit more funding. A couple more technical questions, which are again you're more than capable of answering, probably more than me or, or most people in Canada. So one question is just around the definition of net zero energy ready, or NZER, and that can you just talk about that? There's various definitions related to that, and maybe some of the controversy around that with the new model building code. And then secondly, I think this is related to your comment around GHGs and making it difficult across multiple jurisdictions. Mohammed asked, why not have an EUI-based code by climate zone and then building type across the country? So just two kind of technical, more definition things, and maybe you can address both.
Oh, sure. That'd be great. I mean, we got at least 15, 20 minutes for me to fill the air on this one. These are
Tell us the gossip.
Yeah, okay, yeah. I'll try and keep it high level here. But net zero energy ready, the challenges with net zero energy ready and some of the definitions associated with net zero energy ready was, does net zero energy ready apply to the building? Does it have to have the space and the availability for renewables to be attached to that specific building in order to offset its energy use? Or can you do it at a community scale? So those definitions, I mean, we all know fundamentally that the definition of net zero energy ready is the building consumes as little, the amount of energy that the building consumes must be offset by renewable energy. And it's that second portion of what does that mean? That second part is really the part that comes into question. On homes, for instance, does net zero energy ready mean that the home is built to a way that it can be offset by energy, or does it also have to have a conduit going to the roof so you can attach PV? And you have to have the roof trusses reinforced so that you can put PV on it. Those are questions that we don't have answers to at this point in time, and that's where that whole definition of where does the bar get set for net zero energy ready? Is it really ready? So that's where the big question comes in, and I think we need to probably nail that down at some point in time so it's consistent across the country. Otherwise, again, we'll have interpretational issues.
And is that part of recommendation one, just that like glossary of definitions that are common and just say, this is what we're all working with?
Yeah, this is what we're all working with. And if you're going to make it a requirement to reinforce roof trusses, make sure that you make sure you put that into code, say in your code at a province or territory level, saying, this is unique to us, not something that is universally applied, so that everyone understands it really clearly.
Okay.
Mohammed's question with regard to GHGs and can we not just do something that's an EUI, weather-dependent EUI, near and dear to my heart. We worked diligently to put EUIs in place for the 2015 NECB. It got deferred based on the fact that it really didn't meet all of the provinces and territories' needs at the time, so we wound up sidelining it. And as a committee, the standing committee decided that a reference proposed approach for the NECB was a much more straightforward approach, because you got to think the NECB deals with a hospital, a zoo, a multi-unit residential building, mixed-use building. How do you actually do the right formulas? I'm certainly going to be promoting that we take a look at that for the 2025 code so that we're harmonized with the amazing work Toronto Green Standard has done and the BC STEP code, where they do have EUIs. And do them by weather zone or by whatever else works well. But I think EUIs are a fantastic idea. These are energy use intensities. Sorry for the acronyms again. Energy use intensities. Here's how much energy your building will use outside of MRIs and other plug loads. But this is the base building, how much it uses. A lot of other folks are also looking at TEDIs, so thermal energy demand indices, where they say, how well does your building envelope perform? And I know in BC, they had the envelope first philosophy, where it's, let's get a really solid envelope, and then the rest, we'll figure out the rest with total energy use indices. But let's make sure that the envelope, which is going to be there for a very long time, works really, really well. So I think that's another thing that we need to look at from a national code perspective. But you'll see that in the single family home, because it's a little easier to see. So you'll see it in 936, but you won't see it in the NECB in this code edition.
Okay. So I'm going to follow and try and batch a few questions here because the comments you just made are seem to be quite popular in here, and it's great to see the passion of all of you. And it has to do with how codes are related to climate and carbon concerns. And so Mike Melross is out in Edmonton, and he's looking at this and saying, okay, well, if that's the case, how do we start to connect codes to a more of a regional approach, and how do we actually follow the carbon? And then there are two other questions, one related to if this is such a big part of Canada's contribution to its Paris climate commitments, we got to figure this out. Like, how is the federal government going to report against this, internationally? And then the third thing related to carbon, and you can answer any of these in whatever order you like, is the issue of natural gas and natural gas hookups in new buildings, and the connection between codes and what we're seeing in some jurisdictions south of the border related to natural gas phase outs. So feel free to answer any of those three, but around kind of the broader topic of climate and codes.
Yeah, thanks, Corey, and thank you all for those amazing questions because they are very topical and germane to the aspect of energy codes. Let's start with the policy. The Pan-Canadian Framework identified that, we're going to meet our target, our Paris Agreement obligations. The provinces and territories, except for Saskatchewan, all agreed to this idea. And even in that, they said that by 2030, we will have net zero energy ready codes, not net zero carbon ready codes, acknowledging the fact that each province and territory are going to be way different when it comes to their carbon content. So I think that, having that local content, so BC has a GHGI, or Vancouver, I should say, has a greenhouse gas indicator in their code. Toronto and the Green Standard have it in theirs. So you can build it into your own. I think what would be interesting is in that national database, it would be fun and exciting to not only say your energy level, but also what your GHG content was at the moment. So here's the challenge that we have. The grid changes all the time. Even in Ontario, we have a very clean grid, but it's going to be 3 or 4 times, 5 times maybe more GHGs than it had a few years ago because of the nuclear refurbishment. So how do you account for that? Where do you put that into the equation? My fundamental philosophy anyways, is the lower you can bring energy use in the building, the better off you're going to be when it comes to how much GHGs your building is going to consume, no matter what. If it uses very little, it's going to have very little carbon footprint. Now, with regard to natural gas, hot topic. Enbridge and folks have been working on renewable natural gas. That's interesting. I am certainly personally not opposed to natural gas. Not opposed to natural gas. I actually think it's really good if we control the amount of energy used in a building. So again, it goes back to when I was at Minto, we built a net zero energy home in 2008. We had the energy consumption so low in there that we actually wound up doing a natural gas hookup because it was a fairly teeny amount of carbon to heat the home. Putting a geothermal system in, which would have brought that carbon number down to 0, would have cost us an extra $16,000 for one house. Do we really want to spend that much money for that small benefit? So let's focus on what makes the biggest impact first, and then float in the rest afterwards. That doesn't necessarily exclude natural gas from our buildings, certainly not in the short term.
So on that, on value and or cost or impact per cost, Edward asked, kind of, is it possible? Can you start to link the codes to house price valuation? So the greener it is, the more value it is, and then maybe that's an argument that can bring in people outside our bubble in the developer community and in the builder community.
Yeah, it's always a tough one. We used to go through this all the time, as well as how valuable is green, and I think we're starting to see a lot more valuation of green buildings, certainly on the commercial side, and we're seeing it a little bit on the housing side. If you can make your utility costs come down significantly, then it's a big value. I mean, people are still very passionate about the finishes they have in their home, and they're going to spend money on new homes on that side of things. But if we start to do mandatory disclosure of energy use in homes, maybe it'll start to raise the profile a little bit more of how important energy is. Right now, nobody knows. I have no idea how much my neighbor uses in energy. I know how much I use, but I don't know what they use. And maybe if I was buying a new house or a repurposed house, that would be an important statistic for me. So I think this is where energy use disclosure is going to be very, very valuable in the future. And that will raise homeowners' attention towards whether a home should be built more efficiently or not. I mean, energy starts taking off in Ontario. We see it a lot. So obviously homeowners care and builders care to give what homeowners want. So it seems like it's a really good idea.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, we only have a few more minutes, so I wanted to try and get to two more questions. One is, I think this is a quick one, but maybe you can give an update on alterations to existing buildings. Joe asked whether or not the tiered energy codes address existing buildings energy improvements. It does not, but maybe you want to just tell us a little bit about how things are going on the alterations to existing buildings code.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, it's a bit of a segue off, but let's go with currently the code does not apply to alterations to existing buildings. We expect that in the very near term, we're going to be given the mandate to start looking at alterations to existing buildings. I know Vancouver's done a lot of work with regard to alterations and how that fits into their code. And there's a bit of work going on in Nova Scotia as well. But nationally, I expect that we're going to be given the mandate to have alterations to existing buildings. And I'm super pumped by it, Corey, because if I can start to create a code for new buildings and then bring in alterations to existing buildings, there's a huge gap if we can start to bring them together so that buildings perform in a way that is predictable and achievable and we can measure it later on, then that would be a great gap to try and close off. So right now,
Great.
Joe, no alterations to existing buildings in our current national codes.
Okay. And we've got about a half a dozen other questions we probably won't be able to get to, but I just wanted to bring back to one specific thing in your presentation, which is the role of building officials. And maybe you could just expand just for like a minute or two, just on what you see as, their role in this and the very specific types of barriers. And maybe you have an example of a type of barrier that a building official would have and how the recommendations we've outlined could overcome that.
Yeah, and I think the building officials' role is huge. I mean, these are the folks that are going to be saying, yes, you can build that building. And more importantly, these are the folks that are going to say, yeah, you can occupy that building, which is really important to most developers and builders. I would say one of the more interesting conversations I had with one of the building official folks was they spend a great deal of time working with developers and builders that submit in plans that are completely not right. They don't meet code, they got to go back, they got to educate them. So I would see a role for building officials to be part of that education process on making sure that people understood how energy codes worked and being part of that process to say, yeah, this is how I would interpret it, or no, this isn't how I would interpret it. So if they feel that if they, from what I've talked to a few of them, they felt that if they were able to get better plans in to their departments, they could save a phenomenal amount of time, which would then allow them to build more capacity. You can see how this is a self-fulfilling prophecy. The less time they spend reviewing plans because they work, the more time they can get education and training themselves on those plans and processes. So it's about getting both sides, the developers that are putting in, builders putting in their plan, their submissions, and the building officials reviewing them. You get them working together with an accredited energy assessor network, wow, things will start to go fluidly.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, and before we close, if even folks have been monitoring the chat, Gabby put in some hot news straight off the press, very relevant to what we're doing. And I think you're going to start to see this across the country with multiple different provinces, but Ontario's just signed a Canada-wide agreement on construction codes saying that they will harmonize. Energy efficiency is in there, so that goes to your slide around this Canada-wide free trade harmonization work that's happening that has a huge impact on this. So the shoe's starting to drop. This is very timely. I know that officials in various different provinces have been working hard on this, and federally, I know it's on the radar. And so thank you, Andrew, for laying it all out and for doing the hard work to kind of come up with exactly what we need to do to boost compliance, because you're right. You said it right off the bat. If we could have the greatest policy, ambition, and code in the world, and if we're not spending the time thinking about working through how we get and boost compliance, it's not going to make a lick of difference. And for all those folks who are on here thinking and working diligently around climate change issues, we know this is where the rubber hits the road. So thank you, Andrew, for clearly outlining exactly what we need to do, doing that hard work, and continuing the work you've been doing for the last 30 years on this. I will say to everyone, I apologize if we didn't get to all of your questions. That's certainly one of the issues we have with this, but we want to contain this to 45 minutes. Please reach out to us. If you have any questions that you burning questions you want to get to, or if there's something we can do to help, and I'm sure Andrew, you're available as well. So
Absolutely.
please reach out directly to Andrew. You can find us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, maybe, Andrew. I don't know what you do, but and we'll definitely get back to you and keep the conversation going. So thank you all so much. Thank you to Andrew. We hope that you all have an excellent weekend, and stay safe and healthy and happy. And we'll see you again next week.